So there's this new documentary on Netflix. I've been watching it. It's fascinating. It's called Wild Wild Country. So the basic idea, there's an Indian guru, and he realizes most of the people at his ashram, a lot of his followers, they're American, and he's getting hassled by the Indian government and also different religious sects within India. So he says, look, why don't we just move our ashram to America, and we'll find some land, we'll buy it up, and we'll create this ashram and this commune right in the heartland of America. And they do it. And in a world where they say, when all is said and done, more is said than done. In a world where there's so many great ideas, the Venus Project, different communes and different utopian ideas, but so rarely do a group of people actually get together and start doing the work and doing the labor. And what's fascinating is this is one case in history where they did. And two things I think made it such a phenomenon. One was this guru, his followers called him Osho. One of the things that distinguished him was when you think of spirituality and Eastern mysticism, oftentimes you think of that being opposed to material things and the world and sensualism and pleasure. You think of it as like restraint and self-denial and asceticism. Now, with him, it was different. It was the idea that you can have sex, you can have pleasure, it's just when you get clingy and have this attachment to it that it becomes problematic. But as long as you have a healthy relationship with material things, you can enjoy all the finer things in life. And they say this many times in the documentary about all the Rolls-Royces he has and all his celebrity status. So it was kind of this where spirituality shifted from denial to partying and Woodstock and Burning Man, and you get, prefiguring these kind of EDM festivals, and you get this kind of like this rock star cult of personality, this kind of celebrity status. So this was new for kind of shifting spirituality from earlier spirituality to this kind of new age hippie counterculture, different kind of spirituality. So right within Oregon, we see this commune start to grow, and we get this fascinating contrast with the ranchers and the cowboy hats and these new hippies with free love. And I love how this documentary, we see the importance of perspective, and how first we get the one perspective where we see the community and we see the harmony and we see the progress and them building all these things and they're playing the music and it seems so great. And then we see the perspective from the locals, the people who are already there, where it's all these young people who are all on drugs. They all look the same. They're all wearing weird clothing. And for them, it looks like this hostile takeover. And we get this great clash of civilizations where anytime you have one group and you have new people coming in, there's oftentimes a bit of distrust, but it's for reasons like economic anxiety. You're worried about the new people taking your jobs and they're having less resources to go around, or it's just language barriers, not being able to communicate. This was something different where for the people who were there, which are largely Christian, they saw these new people coming in as having a fundamental different value system, philosophy, way of life. So for them, it wasn't a common, native population versus immigrant situation. No, this was kind of the forefront of a real war for the soul of America. And with the perspective thing, one of the things that this commune did, they did this thing called dynamic breathing or dynamic meditation. Part of that was chaotic breathing. And we hear it talked about in the documentary. And then we see actual footage of it, and the footage of it, very disturbing. If you just watch it, it looks like demonic possession. It looks like some kind of weird thing the followers of Satan would do. So it's just, again, when you're within the commune and you know the context of these things, you're going to have one perspective on it. When you're an outsider and all you're doing is watching the media and you see someone play the footage of these people writhing and convulsing, you're going to think, yeah, you are at the forefront of a war for the soul of the country. And it's interesting that this documentary really shows you that now the idea of cults and this idea of a cult, it's so widespread, but in the 60s, the idea of a cult was a relatively new thing. It wasn't until the 70s, and ironically enough, it coincides with the hippies and the counterculture movement. We get Jonestown and the tragedy that happens, and what's fascinating is the congressman who was killed at Jonestown, his daughter actually took the money that she got from her father passing away, took the money and then went and gave it to this new commune in Oregon. So all the people who are already a little worried about this new commune, not good optics at all for the daughter of this very high profile murdered congressman to go join this commune and give the inheritance money to this commune. And now you think of what happened. So you get Jonestown. You also get Charles Manson. Now, Charles Manson, most people think of him as a serial killer. He's really a cult leader, more than anything. So it's interesting how nowadays the only time you really hear much about cults is with Scientology. People smear that as a cult. But in the 70s, we had Jonestown, we had Charles Manson. So this idea of cults was very much on people's minds, and we see how the media to stir up fears and to get ratings would play into this a lot and stoke people's fears of this, and probably inflate fears more than they needed to be. So a couple really interesting things. One is we really do live in a time of, there's this idea of TINA, there is no alternative, where the idea of any kind of alternative to democracy, capitalism, mortgages, pensions, anything like that, there really seems like all alternate ideas have been tried and failed. So we really live in a time where the kind of status quo establishment that we have, it may not be perfect, but that's really all there is. There is no alternative. So anytime you have a group of people that actually try and seem to be managing to live in a different way, it's very controversial, it's very threatening. And what's fascinating, so within this little clash of civilizations, it's almost like a sitcom, because you have the people that live there, they've been going to this cafe for all these years, and then suddenly they show up and the name on the cafe's changed to Buddha's one, and suddenly rather than grits they're serving fried bananas. So it's almost this kind of fun sitcom fish out of water situation. And what's interesting is, for the first time, you always think of hippies as never really having any power, never really being part of the system, being kind of outside the system. This was the first time you saw, partly because the spiritual movement, again, they didn't shun materialistic things, they just shunned an unhealthy attachment to them. So for the first time you had an anti-establishment movement that had money, it had labor and people willing to work, it had guns and weapons, and we get these fascinating situations where, when you want to be a marksman and shoot, part of it is controlling your breathing. So for all these people who knew how to meditate, they're actually pretty good sharpshooters. So you had them with weapons, you had them with political power. They would, not only would they have the numbers to vote, but they would work the system and they would find all these loopholes. And again, you think of hippies being opposed to the system, not going to be part of the system. This was not even overthrowing the system. This was them taking over the system and using the system to their advantage to actually win elections, get in power, and for the first time have police power. And you get these funny visuals of cop cars with people with full beards and long hair driving around in these cop cars, something you almost never see. In some ways, the conflict between the commune and the people already there, it's just the oldest story of the escalating cycle of provocation, where one side, they feel threatened, so they arm themselves and get weapons in their mind to defend themselves. The other side sees, now the other side's arming themselves, and they interpret it as now they're under attack, so they arm themselves more, and it's just a vicious cycle. And so we had the guru, Osho, and then we had initially his secretary, she grew very powerful, Sheela. Now, what's fascinating about Sheela is, again, you think Eastern mysticism, Buddhists, all the people you stereotypically associate with spirituality as being very passive, very pacifist. She was very aggressive and very assertive, very crude, foul-mouthed. So she would go and do interviews with the media, and she would just talk down to people and be so aggressive. So it's a kind of militant spirituality that I think was one of the things that really made this commune distinct. And then what this commune starts doing is they start shipping in homeless people, and they would give them food and clothing, but they would also get them to vote for them. So one, it's all about perception. Again, are they going to these kinds of people because they think they're vulnerable and they can exploit them and brainwash them? Or are they going to these kinds of people because they really care about helping people and they know that these are the people that need the help the most? So again, it's all about perception. And so not only now for the people living there, do they have these hippies and these free love people and these nudists and these people that are opposed to them, but now they also have criminals and they also have minorities and they also have a bunch of homeless people. So now it's just even worse for them as far as kind of what their comfort level is. So what's fascinating is, in a role reversal, the people who are already there, by and large Christians, they started to use separation of church and state laws actually against this new commune. And really the only time you ever think of separation of church and state is against Christians, at least within the American context, having it used by Christians against a religious minority. Very interesting. And then remember, this is during the 80s, so Cold War is in full swing, and all the outfits, everyone at this commune, they're all dressed in either orange or sometimes red. So a lot of the anti-communist sentiment, better red than dead, they can just reappropriate that and use it against this commune, fairly or unfairly. So I'm just about done the documentary series. It's 6 episodes. I'm midway through episode 5, getting to some of the almost violence, assassination attempts, poisoning. So it'll be interesting to see how it wraps out. But again, this is a great documentary series. It's one of those really truth is stranger than fiction things. If someone described this, you'd think it was too outlandish for a TV series or anything. So definitely worth a watch. Can be a little slow, and sometimes I wish sometimes the guru Osho, they don't really flesh him out too much at all. He's kind of a background figure. His secretary Sheela, she's a major figure. So kind of wish you got more about him, kind of the teachings. And sometimes they'll really get into the weeds. They'll spend a lot of time talking about how they're bussing in people, immigration issues, and just like it can feel like it's not too long a series, but it can feel like it drags at times. And I just wish they focused a little less on some stuff and a little more on others. But regardless, it's such a fascinating historical thing. Definitely worth the watch.